The first problem was not the engine we had, the rails we had, laid since the ore cart days when we were still dragging magnetite down from the upper seam on wooden sledges. The problem was the thing everyone in the works kept saying out loud, the way people repeat a fear until it sounds like a fact. An iron wheel on an iron rail, no teeth, no grip, it'll just spin and go nowhere. Mokje brought it to me on a gray morning when the forge smoke was lying flat against the ridge. He stood in the doorway of the engine shed with his arms crossed and the look on his face of a man who has been listening to other people's doubts long enough that some of them have started to feel like his own. Everyone says the same thing, he said. An iron wheel on an iron rail, no teeth, no grip, it'll just spin and go nowhere. Half the works thinks we need a toothed rail like a gear. I don't know that they're wrong. That's the first thing we have to settle before we build a thing the size of a house that can't climb its own road. He was right to bring it first. A machine that can't move is just a very expensive boiler. Then that's where we start, I said. The smallest honest question. Does the wheel grip? Everything rides on that one, literally. Pyo, we need a number, not an opinion. Pyo Eun-ha ran the test on the scale rig we'd built for the bearing trials, a section of rail, a flanged wheel, a stack of iron weights, and a spring gauge measuring the force required to make the wheel slide rather than roll. She loaded it methodically, recording each reading in the same hand she used for everything, small, even, unhurried. Cho Yeong stood beside her and piled on the weights. The answer came back clean. There, Pyo said, reading the scale. It grips by friction, and friction grows with the weight pressing down, so a heavier engine grips harder, not worse. No teeth, no toothed rail. We do not fight the weight, we use it. The thing they feared, that it's too heavy, is precisely the thing that makes it work. I do love when the fear and the solution turn out to be the same fact, wearing two faces. Cho Yeong was still loading weights, watching the gauge needle climb. The more I load it, the better it bites. So we want it heavy. That's the first machine we've ever built, where my instinct to make it lighter is exactly wrong. I wrote the number down. Then I wrote it again on the board above the engine shed door, where the whole works could see it. Not because I thought anyone would doubt it. Pyo's numbers didn't invite doubt, but because a fear that has been living in a room for weeks needs to be evicted visibly. The wheel grips. The weight is the grip. We build heavy and we build it now. The drivetrain had been born on a bench. I remembered the day we'd first run it. The connecting rod turning the crank, the flywheel smoothing the pulse, the whole assembly bolted to oak planks and going nowhere except in place, proving a principle. Now we were building the same thing again, only this time it would carry itself away. Baek Dae-ho oversaw the driving wheels, cast, trued on the lathe, fitted with springs so the engine would ride the rough spots in the roadbed rather than pound them into rubble. He came to me one evening while the wheels were still cooling on the sand floor, running his thumb along the tread with the expression he got when something had turned out right and he wasn't quite ready to say so. Driving wheels poured and trued and sprung so she rides the rough spots instead of pounding them, he said. Strange thing, building the drivetrain again, only this time it carries itself away, instead of standing on the bench. Feels like the machine grew legs and decided to leave home. I understood the feeling. There is a difference between a machine that proves a principle and a machine that acts on it. The bench engine had been an argument. This was a departure. Doh Gwang came to the design meetings every morning and said very little until the boiler came up, and then he said everything. A boiler that sits still nearly killed us all, so understand me, he said, the first time we laid out the full assembly drawing. His voice was the same as it always was, not loud, not theatrical, just the voice of a man who has decided that the words he is about to say are the most important words in the room. A boiler that moves, that bounces and sloshes and rattles down 40 miles of rail with a fire roaring in it, frightens me more than anything we have ever built. So it gets everything. 2 relief valves, the melt plug, a water glass the driver watches like his own heartbeat, and a rule that she stops the instant the water runs low. We move fire now. We do not get to relax about fire, not ever again. We gave it everything. The safety culture we had built after the incident, the culture that had cost us weeks and a near catastrophe to earn, rode along on every bolt and fitting. A moving boiler is a boiler that has decided to take its risks with it wherever it goes. It deserved our full attention, and it got it. Yoon-sorin appeared on the survey line 3 days before the first run, walking the roadbed with a measuring rod and a level and the expression of someone who has finally found a project worthy of her full severity. A railway is just metrology you can walk on, Pyo, she said, when Pyo came out to walk the grade with her. The grade can't exceed what the engine can pull up, so we measure. The curve can't be tighter than the wheelbase can swing, so we measure. The rails must sit a hand's span apart the whole 40 miles or she derails, so we measure and measure and measure. Honestly, it's the most ME thing we have ever built. 40 miles of being exactly right or people die. Pyo walked beside her with her hands behind her back, looking at the roadbed with the same attention she gave to a finished surface. The engine is the glory, she said. The roadbed is the truth. As ever, the truth is longer and less thanked. Salding allowed herself a small sound that was almost a laugh and went back to her rod. I had watched them survey for 2 days before I understood what Selyin meant when she called it the most her thing we had built. Every standard we had established in the metrology room, every flat plate, every gauge block, every calibrated measure, had been in service of making the things we built in the workshop true to each other. The railway was that same discipline extended across a landscape. The gauge had to be the same at mile 1 and mile 40. The grade had to be within tolerance at every point along the climb. The curves had to be laid to a radius the wheelbase could follow without binding. It was measurement as civil engineering, and Selyin walked every inch of it herself. The morning of the first run, the engine stood on the rails in the pale light before dawn, breathing steam from the relief valves in slow, patient exhalations. Mokje was at the regulator. The rest of us stood along the line. I had built many things in this place. I had built the lathe and the boring mill and the steam engine itself, and each of them had been a threshold, a thing that made the next thing possible. But there is a particular quality to the moment before a machine moves under its own power for the first time, carrying itself, that nothing else quite replicates. The bench engine had turned in place. This one was going to go somewhere. Moksei opened the regulator. The driving wheels turned. The flanges bit the rail. The engine moved. She's gripping. She's rolling. Teacher, she's carrying herself. She's going. Moksei was laughing, his voice carrying back over the sound of the exhaust beats quickening as the speed built. No belt, no bench. She's going down the road and pulling her own weight to do it. It works. The heavy thing climbs its own road. I was running alongside, which I had not planned to do, and could not have stopped myself from doing. The exhaust beat was steady. The wheels were true. The whole machine was doing exactly what the numbers had said it would do, and it was still astonishing. She goes, I called up to him. Now hook the carts on, Mach. A house that moves itself is a marvel. A house that moves itself and drags the whole valley's surplus behind it. That's an iron road. Ji Wol-yeong watched the loaded consist move out for the first time from the ridge above the works, where the view took in the full length of the line we'd laid. She came down afterward and stood by the engine shed without saying anything for a while. When she spoke, her voice had the quality it always had when she was doing the arithmetic that was her particular work, not the arithmetic of loads and grades, but the other kind. 100 oxen in one machine, she said. Everyone here is seeing grain and iron move fast. I'm seeing something else, because it's my job to. That train could carry 400 armed men and their powder and their cannon to a battle 40 miles off, between dawn and noon, fed and rested, while the enemy's still lacing their boots. You didn't just solve moving the surplus, you changed what a frontier is. A thing this fast can't be ruled the slow old way. The empire is going to understand that the moment word reaches it, probably faster than we'd like. I had known this in the way you know a thing you have been putting off examining. The railway was a logistics engine, and logistics is never neutral. I said nothing, because there was nothing to say that she hadn't already said more precisely. The line reached Saebyeok on a cold afternoon, the consist rolling into the square where, 2 years ago, in the bad season before the sky tier, they had burned Cho Yeong's grade books. The bearings she had spent a year calibrating, the records of every standard she had established, fed to a fire by frightened people doing what frightened people do. Now they were unloading the train she had helped build, and they were cheering it in. Cho Yeong stood beside me and watched them work the cargo off the flat cars. She had the look of someone who has decided not to feel more than the moment warrants, and is finding that the moment warrants quite a lot. They burned my bearings grade books in this square dojin, she said, 2 years ago, and now they're unloading a train I helped build, cheering it in. The sky tier scared them toward us, but this is what'll keep them with us. Not fear, not even the catastrophe. Just a train that shows up when it says it will, with what they need, reliability. It turns out that's how you actually win people. You just keep showing up, true on time, forever. Neighbors, not strangers, I said. That's the whole frontier we're building, Cho. Close enough to lean on each other. The magic used to do that. Now the iron does. Pyo said it plainly, the way she said most things that mattered. The old roads ran where the magic let them. Town to shrine to gate, a net of light no one understood and no one could mend. We are drawing a new net over the corpse of the old one, in iron, and every line of it is a thing a trained crew can lay and a trained crew can fix. We are not mourning the magic that held the world together. We are replacing it with something humbler and stronger, because when it breaks, and it will, we will know exactly why and exactly how to mend it. No one ever got to say that about the veil. A net of iron where there used to be a net of light, and this one's ours. We can see every inch of how it works. That was the thing about the veil, the dome of pale light that had held the frontier together for generations, that was guttering out now like a lamp running low on oil. Nobody had built it, nobody understood it. When it failed, nobody could fix it, because nobody had ever known the mechanism, only the effect. It had been a gift from something older and larger, and when the gift ran out, there was nothing to do but watch. The railway was the opposite of that. Every rail had been smelted from ore we had dug, rolled in a mill we had built, spiked to ties we had cut and shaped. Every grade had been surveyed and recorded. Every curve had been laid to a calculated radius. When something failed, and things would fail, rails would crack, ties would rot, grades would wash out in the spring floods, we would know what had failed and why, and we would fix it because we had built it and we understood every inch of how it worked. Humbler and stronger, that was the trade. The imperial envoy had been at Saebyeok. I had noticed him watching the unloading with the careful attention of a man who is not admiring but measuring. Ji Wol-yeong had noticed him too. That envoy wasn't admiring it, Dojin, she said, when we were walking back along the line in the last light. He was measuring it, same as Seirin would, but for a different master. He's going home to say one thing. Iron Ridge is building a thing that will make it impossible to crush in 5 years, and easy to crush today. So crush it today. Every mile of rail we lay makes us stronger and makes the Empire's window to stop us smaller. We just started a race, and we started it by showing them the finish line. I had known this too. The knowing didn't make it easier to hold. The road runs both ways, she said after a silence. It carries our grain out, and it could carry their army in. But here's the soldier's truth. We can't UN build it, and slowing down only widens their window. The only way through a race you've already started is to run it. We lay rail faster, link the towns faster, arm them faster, until we're a web too strong and too spread out to cut with one stroke. A frontier that stands together can't be crushed town by town. Bind it all before they bring the hammer down on any one piece of it. Then we go faster, I said, and we'd better get the next thing built quick while young. The engine that doesn't need a rail at all. A road runs both ways, but a machine that goes anywhere answers to no one's road. I stood at the railhead late, after the others had gone in. The line ran away from me into the dark, 2 parallel threads of iron, disappearing where the torchlight gave out. 40 miles of being exactly right or people die. As Saurine had said, 40 miles of measurement made permanent, hammered into the earth. a spine of iron for the whole frontier, and it still only went where we laid it. The railway was the largest thing we had built. It was also, in a way I was only beginning to understand clearly, a constraint. Every ton of freight it moved, every mile of connection it made, every town it bound to every other town, all of it happened along a fixed line, a predetermined path. The engine was powerful beyond anything this frontier had seen, and it was also completely dependent on the road we had given it. Take away the rail and it was nothing. A very expensive boiler, going nowhere. The next one doesn't need a road at all. I had been thinking about it since before the locomotive was finished, the way you think about the next problem while you're solving the current one, keeping it in the back of your mind like a bearing you've set aside for inspection. A smaller fire, a smaller engine, something that could leave the rails and go anywhere, that answered to no fixed path, that could reach the places where we hadn't yet laid iron and might not for years, the whole world for a road. That was the one. I had known it for a while, in the way I had known things before, the way I had known the lathe was possible before I had the metal for it, the way I had known the steam engine was possible before I had the boring mill to make it true. The knowledge ahead of the means pulling the means forward. A smaller fire, a smaller engine, and the whole world for a road. That's the one I came here to build. The torches burned along the line. The engine stood cooling in the shed, ticking as the metal contracted. Somewhere down the dark rail, Saebyeok was still lit up, the sound of the celebration carrying faintly on the cold air. We had bound 2 towns together with iron tonight. There were more towns, and the window was closing, and the road ran both ways. I turned away from the railhead and went to find paper.